I want to thank our sponsor, Newmark Watch Company, who are a British-owned brand and are one of the creators of the original RAF 6BB watches, which was part of the Fab Four and would have been worn by Buccaneer, Harrier, Tornado and many other pilots and aircrew. Now the Newmark chronograph is back and updated, so you too can own a bit of RAF history. They also continue to award the Newmark Helicopter Flying Trophy each year at RAF Shawbury, where the trainee pilot with the highest marks is presented with the trophy and a 6BB watch. Make sure to visit their website at newmarkwatchcompany.com to discover their storied heritage collection, including the iconic 6BB pilot's watch alongside a Faithful Field watch and 2 stunning dive watch variations. Thank you and enjoy.
The last one I did when we were Blue Air for the F3, the F-16 had just come in to do SEAD, and the SEAD squadron was very, very much we can do everything.
Okay.
There was a guy called Two Dogs who was their lead for about the 3rd day, and because the aeroplane could do sweep and it could do SEAD and it could do everything else, his brief was that he didn't bother about the F-15s. He was going to go first. They were going to sweep the area, they were going to suppress the enemy air defences and everything. Unfortunately, they got airborne, they pointed towards the target, and because there wasn't a sweep in front of them, they put the sweep behind them. They all got shot down at the first merge, which meant subsequently, whilst the F-15s could move the fighters out of the way, all of the SAM systems were still live, and the entire mud package got absolute carnage by the SAM systems and some of the air defenders. The bit that I found really amusing was when we all went back to the debrief. There's a massive auditorium with 250 people in it, and after you've had your mini debriefs, the key people stand up and they do the brief. So the package lead will brief, the SEAD lead will brief, and as Two Dogs stood up out of the audience, all these little red laser dots from handheld lasers just appeared literally all over his body, and he just went absolutely silent and walked off the screen. There's nothing else you can say about that. That was debrief over and complete. So that's kind of an insight into how flag worked, how we trained and the complexities of it. I can't go into weaponeering obviously and all that stuff because it's not really germane to how we did it. It's a great system, it's a great exercise to do. I enjoyed every minute of it, and I have to say it was worth the trip to the States. The training value was enormous, but it was also a nice balance of getting to know people, see other nations, as well as your own training benefits. It was good. It was a great way to do business. We still do it. The exercises are smaller now, the aeroplanes are more capable, but the training value is of no less value at all.
Yeah. And before we get into, I'm sure you'll have a few memorable stories you can share with our viewers. What was it like working with the Americans? Obviously your first time there, and what was it, just all them aircraft? Was it like being a kid in a candy shop kind of thing?
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's multinational working is fantastic because you can judge it in a couple of ways. One is you can be almost arrogant with a sort of, well, the Brits are fantastic, and we are fantastic, obviously. But every nation brings something, so there's always something you can learn from somebody else. US forces, particularly in the 80s, brought with them a gravity of mass. You know, they had lots and lots of assets to throw at things. I did a red flag with the Singaporeans, who were just incredibly technically based, so they brought lots of technology with theirs. We brought the German Air Force GR1s over there for one exercise. The Germans were very stoic and very process-driven, very stereotypical, but what that meant was that their planning was absolutely immaculate. So each nation brings its own thing as it comes, and its own capabilities, and its own character, absolutely.
So Mids, can you share a few memorable stories from your time at Flag, mainly on the F3?
Yes, of course. It's an interesting one, that because of the complexity of the environment, there's always something somewhere that just gets in the way. And an element of good planning is always essential, but there's always an element of luck as well. So on one of the red flags where we were Red Air, working with the Americans, we spent the first week with the aggressors simply doing Russian tactics. Generally speaking, arriving high into the fight with set maneuvers designed to give complexity to the Blue Force Air Defence radar guys, but invariably it meant we got separated out and we often got shot. So after about a week of effectively being targets, still learning a lot, but being targets for Blue Air, we thought we'd try and do something different. So on the Monday of week 2, we talked the Americans into allowing us to do an ambush cap. So across the operating area of Red Flag, about in the middle, there's a fairly substantial mountain range. It's about 1,800 feet above the base level of the Red Flag operating area. It's called Worthington Ridge. It goes all the way up through the area, from just east of the container all the way up to the edge of the airspace that you can use. what we elected to do was a Soviet tactic, so we still stuck to Soviet tactics. The aggressors put up about a 10 ship at high level in a close formation so they could do a detonation and flow out, which gives you radar problems for sorting. And we sat really forward at Worthington going north-south at low level with all of our radars turned off and just the Link 16 running. So we could see the radar picture that was being given to us by the red E3 and the red air defense system. We waited for the American F-15s who were sweeping to go over the top. They missed us completely. We waited for the F-16s who were SEAD to go over the top. They missed us completely as well. They were all focusing on the aggressors up at height. And then as the German Air Force came over the ridge at low level, we fired up the radars, turned on the systems, and literally shot down the German Air Force as they came over the ridge at Worthington. We turned right into the bomber stream. The Singaporean F-16s were next. We caused absolute carnage there, at which point the F-15 aggressors at the front, sweep guys at the front, turned round to intercept us and then shot down the Belgian F-16s who were coming over Worthington because they thought they were us coming the other way. Eventually we got into a fairly big scrap, but it was a really good example of where you can develop your tactics, be hugely successful. I actually ran out of missiles and had to go home. So I'd fired 4 Skyflash and 4 Sidewinders and then just went home without getting killed. That's the only thing we didn't do on those was get airborne reloads. So once you were done, you went home. I think you could go, and guns, you got a gun, don't forget the gun. But it was just a great day. You come down head held high, having a really, really good time. And that's great fun. Another example of where you could be just simply lucky. In the one of the Blue Air days, we were absolutely caught by this detonation of red. They went out, and rather than turning back in, they went around the back and came in from the beam, which meant they're coming in, we're going up the middle like this. We ended up with literally dispersing everybody to the 4 winds, breaking up all the formations. And I was literally just flying along at low level, trying to regain some situational awareness. And I looked up, and there was a pair of aggressors about 8,000 feet above me. And I just pitched the vertical, shot both of them with a Sidewinder, fell off the top and disappeared back down route, and they never saw me. So that was 2 kills without illuminating their kit or them even seeing me or knowing I was there. So there's some really good days you could have doing all that sort of stuff.
And is there any egos in the debrief after that?
No, because of the Air Combat Manoeuvring Instrumentation, the ACMI, you can have as big an ego as you like, but it's on a map on the screen up there and you can watch yourself doing it. So that's one of the great beauties of the flag system, is the debrief is 100% visual. You can see what you're doing, you can see where the other guys are, whether they're the enemy or not. You know, the blue-red, you can see the dispersation, and you can then balance what you thought in the air from your situational awareness to what you see in the debrief. And that's a really levelling way of doing business.
And did you ever swap notes with the nations that were there, the Americans or whatever, the Singaporeans, and like how they do things, or did you just stick to yourself?
No, it was a completely open debrief. So everybody would talk about their own tactics, how they do things. There are obviously some caveats nationally of systems and what you could do with them, and depending on the participants in the flag. So if it was, America runs several flags. They run a US only flag, and they run some restricted flags for specific regions, and then they run open forum multinational flags. But even within the multinational flags, there may be some caveats. The Singaporeans don't have the same systems and aren't clear to the same release of what the systems can do. So occasionally debriefs will be stilted. But generally speaking, amongst the NATO nations, we would all be completely open of what our aeroplanes could do, just like working in NATO, which we do anyway.
So what would be a typical day like, start to finish, time-wise as well?
If you're on the day wave, it depends on the flag. So some red flags are 2 day waves, a morning and an afternoon. Classic flag timing, 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock, something like that. The guys on the 10 o'clock wave will brief up and do that big picture coordination I talked about, time on target, rough start times, how you're going to escort. That will all be done the afternoon of the day before. You'll then come in fairly early in the morning, you'll get the weathers, you'll fine-tune the plan, you'll have a coffee as an air defender while the mugs do all their bombing solutions shit. You'll have a big brief, and then you'll aim to get airborne about 9:30 for a 10 o'clock on task, 40-minute fight, back home for about 11:30. There'll be in-house formation debriefs for about half an hour. Then there'll be element debriefs, so red air, the air defenders, the mud movers, the SEAD guys will have their group debriefs. And then once all that's done, the red and the blue commanders, they'll have a package debrief for each. and then somewhere about 2 o'clock, 2:30, you'll all sit in the big auditorium and go through the whole fight with the big picture lessons. When you've done that, the guys on the next day who are leading will disappear off, and about 3 o'clock they'll start their end of day planning for the next day, and you'll cycle that through for 2 weeks. Guys on the afternoon, they can come in early with you, they can do their big picture stuff first thing, they can then do all of their planning in the morning, fly their afternoon mission, but then they're going home rather than sort of 3, 4, 5 o'clock, they're still debriefing at 6, 7 o'clock at night, so they have a later start in the evening, but they don't need to do their coordination in the evening, they do that the next morning. If it's a day-night flag, I've done one where we flew in the afternoon and at night time. Night flags are amazing because you get to see the guys dropping bombs, you see the flashes of the bombs which can be seen in clear air from 20, 30, 40 miles away. It's the same time frame, it's just the start times differ. So your end of day coordination for the afternoon wave is taking place probably just on the end of the night wave, because red flag won't open until 12 o'clock the next day. So you do your coordination during the night wave to get it going. Great fun, really great fun to do. The night flags are different and challenging because obviously by day you all have safety sanctuaries. So if you lose situational awareness, you fly within a certain height block. Typically red air would have something like 5 to 9,000 feet, and blue air would have 1 to 4,000 feet. So there's always a separation between you. You can come out of those levels if you have situational awareness of what you're doing, who you can see, where you're going. At night, you never really have true situational awareness. Once you get close to each other, you can't see all the other guys because nobody has lights on. You know, nobody's flying with NVGs, so you can't see everything. So you stay not always in your block, but unless you are absolutely sure that there's nobody else near you, you remain in your safety block. Of course, within your own formations, you have to coordinate that block as well. So if there's 4 of you, you'll have a height each, but somebody else might have the same 4 heights. So you need to make sure that your formations are geographically separated so that you can separate in the safety space yourselves in height. So it gets to be quite a mental juggling picture when you're trying to work out where you are, what sanctuary you should be in, where everybody else is. Oh, and then you want to go and shoot somebody down, and the enemy has a vote, of course, obviously, as well.
Must be knackered by the end of it.
It's tiring. It's tiring.
So what was the maintenance like on the F3? Was it quite reliable when you were over there?
We take 8 for 4. Generally speaking, we'd have 4 and 2 spares every day, and a couple being worked or fixed. The engineers would take 2 shifts. Back home in the F4 days, we ran 2 12-hour shifts for engineering. We did that at home. We did that on red flag, so there'd be a day shift and a night shift. The day shift would generally see the aeroplanes in and out and be able to have limited repairing capability, and the night wave would have ability to fix the aeroplanes, replace engines, and do all that sort of stuff. With the F3, if I remember rightly, we ran 2 8-hour shifts. One was to see aeroplanes in and out predominantly, the other was a repairing shift, and they overlapped slightly, so you had a bit of balance. But the F3 was no more probably reliable than the F4, but it was easier to fix. It was much more modular. So where the F4, you might be removing or circuits from the radar, pulling out boards, putting them in, the F3 will be changing a box. It would take a quarter of the time, so it'd be much easier. The secret was to have a flyaway pack of spares that had the right spares of the things you were likely to have go wrong, because if you didn't have one with you, you'd have to ship it from the UK. So at some point for a red flag, I mean, certainly with the Phantom and my time on the Tornado, we'd do 5 Squadron would do 2 weeks, 29 Squadron would do 2 weeks, maybe a Leeming Squadron would do 2 weeks. You'd fly the same aeroplanes out for the whole time, and you'd have a fairly large flyaway pack, which might be 1 or 2 C-130s that fly all the spares out before the exercise, that fly them home at the end, and that would be that. And all forces have a flyaway pack of some description, even now. So Typhoon will have a flyaway pack, so if it deploys anywhere, Estonia for air policing, for example, then it will have a spares package that gets flown out in advance that has all the things you'd think you'd use: spare tyres, radar components, airframe components of things that the system knows are frequently replaced. Light bulbs for wingtip lights is a good example. Those will all be with the flyaway pack. You can't take everything, so you can't take a whole Typhoon in small pieces. So if you hit a bird and lose a panel, then that would have to be brought out from home, back home at Coningsby or Lucas, or for us in those days, Coningsby, obviously.
And did you get a look around each other's aircraft, and did you ever get the Americans looking in the F3, and what did they think of it?
Not really, to be honest. There wasn't the time in the day.
You were just
so busy. You were just always so busy. The engineers were always working the line. The way the red flag line works is it's one massive concrete car park. So you've got, as I said, the 2 runways here. Then on this side, there's just a massive square of concrete, which is huge. It takes about 8 aeroplanes in each line, and they face each other face to face down the car parking. So effectively you turn to go out of this, parallel the runways, and then turn onto the runways. So it's massed with aeroplanes all the time. In order to police that, the aeroplanes have a system of markings on the ground which are yellow lines, and you're not allowed to walk across the yellow line. So the F3 detachment, where it's parked, all these aeroplanes have a yellow line that runs up behind them to the taxiway and then runs across the front, and there will just be a small space in the front that you're supposed to walk through. So if you walk directly to your aeroplane, you'll get one of the armed American guards have a quiet chat with you and a bit of re-education, which has happened to me several times because I'm not quite clever enough to remember the yellow line around the corner. Because of that, generally speaking, unless you were formally invited to look at another aeroplane,
so you couldn't just wander
you
up.
couldn't just wander up and have a look at the latest F-15 or what happens to be. In the 80s and 90s, Nellis had several other things going on, bar red flag. It had the A-10 OCU and a few other things there. It also had something called the threat training facility. And in the threat training facility were a bunch of aeroplanes built by the Russians, often brought back from wars in the Middle East. And you had the ability to be able to sit in a MiG-23, MiG-21, again?
Was it called the petting zoo?
I don't know. We always call it a TTF, but yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. It was made official in the 80s, but before that it existed, but they didn't have it. But you could sit in the enemy's aeroplanes and see how restricted their views were, how their equipment worked, how their hands and throttles moved, what their instruments were like. It also had a bunch of armour as well and stuff, and it convinced me going to war in something like a T-62 or a Chieftain tank was definitely not the thing to do. When you see what a scab does to the inside of a tank, then no thank you. You know, it's like driving around the battlefield with a massive great target painted on your head. So, but a good facility, and they had some expertise there who could talk about things like the Soviet SAM systems, how they worked, how to defeat them. So the education piece was common, and that happened all the way through flag. So you were educated by the same people flying flag as came from the TTF.
Right. And did you work with the US Navy when you were over there on any of the flags?
Yeah, I was nearly mowed down by an F-14. So
really?
we had F-14s on one flag in the F4 days. You know, I mentioned the 2 runways with the parking area at the top. We were all lined up at the parking area, and this F-14 came ploughing down the runway with a total hydraulic failure, missed the overrun cable, went off the side of the runway and literally stopped about 150 yards from us with lots of desert everywhere. And the canopy opened very carefully and 2 guys sort of half fell out and stood looking at their steed with a bit of worry on their face. They'd have been perfectly justified to eject, but they stayed with it to try and keep it from hitting this massed line of about 20 aeroplanes waiting to move between runways.
So let's go on to the social side. What was that like when you were over there? That must have been quite fun.
It's great. The getting Vegas out of your system over those first 2 nights is really good. You know, everybody went to a casino, everybody went to a bar. The sort of stuff you would do in a foreign land. Personally, I went sightseeing to the Hoover Dam, which fascinated me the first time I ever went. There's a great seafood restaurant on Lake Mead there. I'm not a gambler, so I'm absolutely happy with walking around a casino and using the cheap restaurant and having a beer. Some of the guys would have a flutter at gambling. We had one of our airmen who spent his entire first week's allowances on the first night on the roulette table, and then spent the next week spending his own money on the cheapest possible food from McDonald's. But again, you're out in a foreign land, you've got to get your system sorted. During the week, you would take it very steady just because you're on 12 to 14 hour days. So we generally found hotels that weren't casinos. So there was just a restaurant facility and a bar, which meant it was easy to relax, have a beer, stack, have a good breakfast the next day. The weekend would be free. So Friday night, there would be a happy hour in the mess at Vegas. That was great because Nellis Mess would have all of the red flag guys there and all of the station guys, so you'd have a massive great party on Friday.
So mixed together, it wouldn't just be the RAF guys on their own?
No, it'd be the whole of the red flag setup, and all the US from Nellis would come along as well to the base. So that was just great fun. You'd have a really good few beers and swap stories. That generally wrote off Saturday. Find something to do at Saturday. Most of the guys, bizarrely, would go shopping downtown because Vegas is a tax-free city. So if you like Levi 501s, baseball boots, or through to the Loom t-shirts, they're dirt cheap downtown
That was
Vegas.
definitely the 90s thing.
So it was. So you'd do a bit of shopping, maybe something like that. Chilled Sunday, maybe take a boat out on Lake Mead. It's quite chilling and nice to do. And then having done all of that, you'd be ready for your Monday. Start early and off you went.
And how did you contact home? Because obviously I'm guessing there was no internet back in the day. Was it like one phone call a day or nothing at all?
Didn't contact home.
No, right.
Go away, you're on detachment. As you say, there was no phone lines. Yeah. I'll use an example as when I was in the Falklands. I was the boss of the Falklands in 1997, so the same sort of era. The Falklands before had no telephone system. So the only way you could dial home was to get airborne in the aeroplane, call on high frequency radio to Portishead Radio, which is a maritime HF radio, which has a facility for sailors all around the world to get on board an HF, bounce the signal around the world, and then connect it to a UK telephone. So if you really needed to phone home, you'd go flying and do it. But generally speaking, we wrote letters. TriStar did its rotation of people twice a week. So it was a TriStar on a Saturday and a Tuesday. So your mail would arrive Tuesday and Saturday, and the TriStar would leave the next morning very early. You couldn't get a letter on it. So I used to have a Tuesday conversation. So letters that arrived on Tuesday would be sent on Sunday, and I'd have a Saturday conversation. So letters that arrived on Saturday will get sent on Wednesday. And we had Helen and I had a sort of balancing letters from two different conversations, which means you've got to get your head around what's going on. It's quite difficult. So for a flag, there was no way of simply phoning home. There was no internet, there were no mobile phones. So guys would go away for 2 weeks and go away for 2 weeks.
So when you were on the flags, would you be living on base or were you out in the hotels?
Generally hotels. So hotels downtown. I looked at, on 5 Squadron, I was the weapons lead, so I was looking at the Red Flag detachment. We were actually given the option to stay in some fantastic rooms in Caesar's Palace. Oh, wow. But the arrangement with Caesar's Palace was I wanted to put on the front of their massive signage, Caesar's Palace, welcome to the Royal Air Force. It was not really de rigueur to be seen Royal Air Force in a massive casino. I know what the boys will be doing in the evenings as well, and people in Caesar's Palace breakfast room in their flying suits before going to work. So that was presentationally not the best way to do things. So we would find reasonable hotels that you could get breakfast in, that had good safe accommodation, and that wouldn't, generally speaking, didn't have a casino attached. And that was good. I quite like that because those that gamble then weren't tempted to gamble where they were living. You could control a little bit your finances. You had to go out to gamble, so if you didn't want to or you were trying to manage it, you could do it all at home. But most of those places would have a restaurant somewhere, so when you got back late at night, you could get a sandwich and a beer or something similar.
So if you were out and about and someone said, oh, what do you do? Like sometimes people do, would you be allowed to say like RAF pilot, or would you say something else?
It depends really, it's up to you. I mean,
so you do
most of the time there's no restriction on saying what you are.
Right.
If you meet a random person in the high street in Vegas with an English accent, people will stop you with an English accent in the States and ask where you're from. If you feel like having a conversation, often saying, I'm over here with the Air Force flying out of Nellis is a good way to have a and a bit of interest. If you didn't, you could say you're a lighthouse keeper from somewhere up in Scotland.
I heard diamond jewelers or something like that as well.
Lots of guys, we all had our own little thing. And you could generally, that would kind of escape conversation then, because there's a lot less interest in being a lighthouse keeper than there is being a fast jet pilot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So how many flags did you actually do, and did you have a favourite?
I did 4. They're all different. So 2 F4, 2 F3, 2 Red Air, 2 Blue Air. I couldn't say I had a favourite. They all had their own benefits. The last F3 one with Link 16 was fantastically successful, so that made that incredibly rewarding. The previous one, when we were Red Air on the previous one, was just great fun. The 2 F4 ones, the F4 was a fantastic aeroplane to fly and fight, so that was just equally fun and enjoyment. So I can't say I had a favourite as such.
All different, but it sounds like the F3 did quite well in the flags anyway.
Certainly in those times, when Link 16 came along, the aeroplane definitely had an edge over everybody else.
So yeah, Mids, what are you up to now? You're flying, or what's happening on your end?
Partially retired now. So I retired, I was the last OC Ops at Linton on Ouse when that closed for flying in 2019. I then did a couple of 3 years with our Military Aviation Authority doing assurance, bit of poacher turned gamekeeper. And I retired from full-time service 2 years ago, but I was invited back as a reservist to do 90 days a year, and I look after airshow assurance. So in the summer, I inspect airshows to ensure they're being delivered safely. You can imagine what we do in the sort of post-Shoreham era. And then during the winter, I write the regulations for airshows, update them, and we just check that the guys that are working up for next year have everything they need that's supported by the regulations. Or if they need changes or amendments to the regulations, we look after that as well.
So keep them busy.
Yeah.
Well, Mids, thanks very much for coming on the show.
As always, it's a pleasure, Mike.